Realization of existence. Regarding from different standpoints the complex forms of the manifestation of spirit, then analyzing the views and opinions of various authors, we are confronted with what seem to be consecutive phases or consecutive stages of this unfolding, and we find such phases or stages to be 4 in number. Further consideration of the living world known to us, from lower animal organisms up to the highly developed body of man, reveals the simultaneous existence of all 4 forms of consciousness to which all other aspects of inner life correspond, the sense of space and time, the form of activity, etc. Still further consideration of man of the higher type reveals the presence of all the 4 forms of consciousness that are in living nature, with forms corresponding to them. The simultaneous coexistence of all 4 forms of consciousness at once, both in nature and in the higher type of man, makes the exclusively evolutionary standpoint seem forced and artificial. The evolutionary standpoint is often used as the means of escape from difficult problems and from hard thinking. Some people apply the evolutionary theory where there is no necessity for it whatsoever. In many cases this is a compromise of thought, not understanding the existing variety of forms, and not possessing the skill to think of all this as a unity. Men have recourse to the evolutionary idea, and regard this great variety of forms as an ascending ladder, not because this conforms to facts, but from a desire to systematize the observed facts at all costs, though upon entirely artificial foundations. It appears to men that having built a system they already know something, whereas in reality the absence of a system is often much closer to real knowledge than an artificial system. Evolutionists, being incapable of understanding the whole, without representing it to themselves as a chain, one link of which is connected with another, are like the blind men in the Oriental fable, who feel of an elephant in different places, and one affirms that the elephant is like pillars, another that it is like a thick rope, and so forth. The evolutionists, however, add to this that the trunk of the elephant must evolve from the feet, the ears from the trunk, and so on. But we after all know that this is an elephant, i.e. a single being unknown to men who are blind. Such a being is the living world, and with regard to the forms of consciousness, it is more correct to consider them not as consecutive phases or steps of evolution which are separate from one another, but as different sides or parts of one whole which we do not know. In man this unity is apparent. All forms of consciousness in him can exist simultaneously. The life of cells and organs, with their consciousness, the life of the entire body taken as a whole, the life of the emotions and of the logical reason, and the life of higher understanding and feeling. The higher form of consciousness is not necessary for life. It is possible to live without it. But without it the organization and orderliness of life is impossible. Long under the domination of materialism and positive thinking, forgetting and perverting religious ideas, men thought it possible to live by merely logical mind alone. However now, little by little it is becoming evident to those who have eyes, that merely through the exercise of logical reason that men will not be able to organize their life on earth, and if they do not finally exterminate themselves, as some tribes and peoples are doing, in any event they will create and have already created impossible conditions of life in which everything gained will be lost, i.e. everything that was given them in the past by men of self-consciousness and cosmic consciousness. The living world of nature, including man, is analogous to man, and it is more correct and more convenient to regard the different forms of consciousness in different divisions and strata of living nature as belonging to one organism and performing different, but related functions, rather than as separate and evolving from one another. Then the necessity disappears for all this naive theorizing on the subject of evolution. We do not regard the organs and members of the body of man as evolved one from another in a given individual, and we should not be guilty of the same error with relation to the organs and members of the body of living nature. It is not possible to deny the law of evolution, but the application of it to the explanation of many phenomena of life is in great need of correction. Firstly, if we accept the idea of one common evolution, then it is necessary to remember that the types which develop slower, the remnants of evolution, may not continue to follow after and at a slower pace the same evolution, but may begin an evolution entirely of their own, developing in many cases exactly those properties on account of which they were thrown out from basic evolution. Secondly, though we accept the law of evolution, there is no necessity to regard all existing forms as having been developed one from another, like man from an ape, for example. In such cases it is more correct to regard them all as the highest types in their own evolution. The absence of intermediate forms makes this view more probable than that which is usually accepted, and which gives it rich material for discussion about the obligatory and inevitable perfection of all, that is, perfection from our standpoint. Maybe the great laboratory of nature had the creation of man in mind right from the start. Animals perhaps are experiments, forms which express some of the fundamental cosmic laws, appearing as their symbol or hieroglyph. The task of the laboratory was to create a form evolving by itself, that is, on the condition of help and support, but with its own forces. This self-evolving form would then be manifest as man. Eric Hoffer touches upon this allegory, and Francis Hitching also asserts the absence of transitory forms in this natural laboratory of life. R. A. Schwaller de Lubitsch said that observation of this living world shows that from the first animal form, all the elements, the idea of what the complete organization of man will be, are already given. It would appear that man, ultimate creature of the animate terrestrial world, is preconfigured. And further, all nature is like a womb in which the human being gestates through phases arrested into typical and independent beings. Perhaps we should presume the existence of some sort of life force, and accept that some non-Darwinian laws work even in the normal evolution of the species. But from the fact that man is aware of himself, which is an entirely different matter from normal evolution, and that other creatures look very incomplete from his vantage point, we can hardly deduce that the rest of evolution happened, with man in mind. Post hoc, propter hoc. The function of inner life may be defined as the realization of existence. Man realizes his existence and the existence of the world of which he is part. His relation to himself and to the world is called knowledge. The broadening and deepening of the relation to oneself and the world is a broadening of knowledge. In order to know the intelligence of a given whole, one should understand the character of that whole and its functions. Man's function in the world is to acquire knowledge, the greater part of which is self-knowledge, not only by his intellect, but by his whole organism and by the entire civilization of mankind. De Lubitsch said in his publication, Symbol and the Symbolic, we forget, or we are not aware that our passage through this life is a school where consciousness must through moral suffering enrich its knowledge of all the higher states which nature teaches us through its symbols. Learning is only the ABC of language which enables us to express ourselves so that communication among individuals becomes possible, but knowledge alone is a goal that justifies our existence and the miseries of its contingencies. The views propounded here are indeed more difficult than the usual evolutionary point of view, just as the concept of the living world as an entire organism is more difficult. However, this difficulty must be surmounted. It has already been said that the real world must be illogical from the usual points of view, and by no means can it be made simple and comprehensible to one and all. The theory of evolution is in need of many corrections, additions and much development. If we consider the existing forms on any given plane, it will be impossible to declare that all these forms evolved from the simplest forms on this plane. Some undoubtedly evolved from lower ones. Others resulted from the process of degeneration of higher forms. A third class developed from the remnants of some evolved configuration, while a fourth class resulted as a consequence of the incursion into the given plane of the properties and characteristics of some higher plane. It is certainly impossible to regard these complex forms as developed by an evolutionary process upon any given plane. The classification proceeding will show more clearly this correlation of forms of manifestation of consciousness, or of different states of consciousness. First form, a sense of one-dimensional space in relation to the outer world. Everything transpires on a line, as it were. Sensations are not differentiated. Consciousness is immersed in itself, in its work of nutrition, digestion and assimilation of food, etc. This is the state of the cell, the group of cells, of tissues and organs in the body of an animal, of plants and of lower organisms. In a man this is instinctive mind. Second form, a sense of two-dimensional space. This is the state of an animal, that which is for us the third dimension, for it is motion. It already senses, feels, but does not think. Everything that it sees appears to it as genuinely real, emotional life and flashes of thought in a man. Third form, a sense of three-dimensional space. Logical thinking, philosophical division into I and not I, dogmatic religions or dualistic spiritualism, codified morality, division into spirit and matter, positivistic science, the idea of evolution, a mechanical universe, the understanding of cosmic ideas as metaphors, imperialism, historical materialism, socialism, etc., subjection of personality to society and law, automatism, death as the extinction of personality, intellect and flashes of self-consciousness. Fourth form, the beginning of an understanding of four-dimensional space. A new concept of time, the possibility of more prolonged self-consciousness, flashes of cosmic consciousness, the idea and sometimes the sensation of a living universe, a striving toward the wondrous, sensation of infinity, beginning of self-conscious will, and moments of cosmic consciousness, possibility of personal immortality. Hence the third form includes that individual man whom science studies. But the fourth form is characteristic of the individual who is beginning to pass out of the field of observation of positivism and logical understanding. The table in the following chapter is a summation of the contents of this entire section, and shows in more detail the correlation of observed forms of consciousness in the living world, and in man. The most interesting and important questions arising with regard to cosmic consciousness may be summated as follows. 1. Is the manifestation of cosmic consciousness a problem of the distant future, and of other generations? Must cosmic consciousness appear as the result of an evolutionary process, after centuries and millennia, and will it then become a common property or a property of the majority? 2. Can cosmic consciousness make its appearance now in contemporary man, i.e. at least as the result of a certain education and self-development, which will aid the unfolding in us of dominant forces and capabilities, as the result of a certain culture? It seems that with regard to this, the following ideas are tenable. The possibility of the appearance or development of cosmic consciousness belongs to the few. However, even in the case of those in whom cosmic consciousness may appear, certain quite definite inner and outer conditions are requisite for its manifestation. A certain culture, the education of those elements congenial to cosmic consciousness and the elimination of those hostile to it. The distinguishing signs of those men in whom cosmic consciousness is likely to manifest are not studied at all. The first of these signs is the constant or frequent sensation that the world is not as it appears to be, that what is most important in it is not what is considered most important. The quest of the wondrous sensed as the only real and true results from this impression of the unreality of the world and everything related thereto. High mental culture, high intellectual attainments are not necessary conditions at all. The example can be given of many saints, who were not intellectual at all but who undoubtedly attained cosmic consciousness, showing that cosmic consciousness may develop in purely emotional soil, i.e. in the given case as a result of religious emotion. Cosmic consciousness is also possible to attain through the emotion attendant upon creative force in painters, musicians, dancers and poets. Art in its highest manifestation is a path to cosmic consciousness. But equally in all cases the unfolding of cosmic consciousness demands a certain culture, a correspondent life. From all the examples cited by Dr. Buckey and others that one might add, it would not be possible to select a single case in which cosmic consciousness unfolded in conditions of inner life adverse to it, in moments of absorption by outer life, with its struggles, its sensual pleasures, emotions, personality and interests. For the manifestation of cosmic consciousness it is necessary that the center of gravity of everything shall lie for man within their inner world, in self-consciousness and not in the outer world at all. If we assume that Dr. Buckey himself had been surrounded by entirely different conditions than those in which he found himself at the moment of experiencing cosmic consciousness, then in all probability his illumination would not have come about at all. He spent the evening reading poetry in the company of companions possessing high intellectual and emotional development, and was returning home full of the thoughts and emotions of the evening. Now, if instead of this he had spent the evening playing cards in the society of those whose interests were common, and whose conversation was vulgar, or at a political meeting, had he worked a night shift in a factory at a turning lathe, or written a newspaper editorial in which he himself did not believe and nobody else would believe, then we may declare with certainty that no cosmic consciousness would have appeared in him at all. For it undoubtedly demands a great freedom and concentration on the inner world. This conclusion with regard to the necessity for special culture and definite favorable inner and outer conditions does not necessarily mean that cosmic consciousness is likely to manifest in every person who is put in these conditions. There are those, probably an enormous majority of contemporary humanity, in whom exists no such possibility at all. And in those who do not possess it in some sort already, it cannot be created by any culture whatever. In the same way that no kind or amount of culture will make an animal speak the language of man. The possibility of the manifestation of cosmic consciousness cannot be inoculated artificially. A person is either born with or without it. This possibility can be throttled or developed, but it cannot be created. Not all can learn to discern the real from the false, but those who can, will not receive this gift of discernment free. This is a thing of great labor, a thing of great work which demands boldness of thought and boldness of feeling. The real point here is that man is a creature that can design its own purpose. We can turn the most animalistic functions into experiences of an entirely different order, and even initiate existence. As Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Darth Vader in The Dark Side, each of them, your trials, no matter how loathsome it may have seemed to you, has ennobled your being. Not the shell in which it is imprisoned, but your being itself. This is the true aim to Zephyr.